it's human ingenuity along with the artificial intelligence that I think is really going to make the day.
Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to be joined today with Trish Uhl. Trish is a great patron of Iventive. Trish, I know you've joined us several sessions last year in Seattle, in Chicago, virtually as well. And there's one thing that Trish had a lasting impact on is, not just last year or the year before, but has always been curious and enthusiastic and perhaps foreshadowing AI and technology, and is a guru in that sense. So I'm really excited to have a chance to talk with you a little bit more about AI and learning and its impact and how they may, they're going to interact going forward. And just discuss that in more detail. This is also the same week as Microsoft Build, so I've seen a lot of the updates come through, the expansion of the Copilot suite, and I think we're both agreed that we really are at a tipping point in terms of the potential and the impact, and so it's never been more topical than now.
That's for sure. And thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be back with Iventive. Yeah, and in addition, so this week is Microsoft Build, and then last week was the spring update from OpenAI, so where they announced the launch of GPT-4o, O is in the letter O, Omni, and then also it was the Google I/O conference. So we've had a sweep of all sorts of different types of updates around artificial intelligence just within the past 10 days. Yeah, for sure. Now is the time.
And just to give a little bit of context to yourself as well. So I knew you first when you were in a role as Director of Learning, Enablement and Innovation, but always with that undercurrent of data, technology, and then AI as well. And I know you've moved specifically into an AI specialist role recently. I would be curious to know a little bit, how do you think learning as a function is adapting to AI, both individually and how it's implementing it for its organizational drive?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Hannah. So, the big thing about it is, I think it goes back to, if we even step out of the technology for a moment and we just take a look at kind of the macro trends that are happening in the world. And so what do I mean by that is, what is putting pressure on the technology that then is putting external pressure, external forces to our organizations, that's putting internal pressure onto organizations, and then of course on L&D teams. And I would say it's this whole disruption to the whole construct of what we think of as expertise. And so what I mean by that is expertise in all of the domains, including in learning and talent development, has always been sort of, number one, gatekeepers, right? Like it's always been somebody decides like how and when, somebody learns, or what the development plans or development path or career progression for other individuals or other populations, there's somebody who's overseeing all of that. And so when it comes to expertise, it's kind of been like sort of exclusive, right? Like, it's professional advice that's only been relegated to, a small number of people and only accessible to a small number of people. And what's happening is that the majority of people around the world, we now have 8 billion people on the planet, like that's the size of the population, and we are quickly accelerating towards 10 billion. And what's happening with all of these technologies, starting with the internet, going into mobile devices, connecting us all in social, cloud, technology, is all of that is now converging into this pressure that people want access to to expertise and professional advice in real time. And so they're not necessarily going to wait for somebody else, a gatekeeper, to say, hey, this is what it is that you need to learn right now. And so that pressure on the professions, and I would say this is true across legal, this is true across medical, and this is definitely true across learning and development, is that these technologies, and especially now with the advent of generative AI, is actually allowing the democratization of expertise. And you can even hear it in what it is that Satya Nadella was talking about in his keynote. And there's a common theme in the messaging across Microsoft Build this week, is that we're not talking about the era of information anymore. This isn't the information age. This is the expertise and intelligence age. And we're seeing in a sweep of tools like generative AI, low code, no code tools for people to be able to, so citizen developers to be able to program their own apps again, without having to have the expertise of, somebody who's in a role as a programmer. And so that to me is the big disruption that is happening, that artificial intelligence is just a part of kind of this larger macro scheme.
I mean, I absolutely concur with that, especially around the democratization of expertise and the access to it. And I think there's a conversation there, in addition to that, is with this access, how important then does critical thinking become, or discernment with the information that people now have access to? I'd be curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, it's another great question. So again, if we kind of think about like what's happening in our consumer lives, right? Like what it is that we have access to and the experiences that we're starting to have based on the technology that we've got available in our homes, right? So, and oftentimes now we're at a crunch that we also experienced like back in the beginning of computer automation in the 1990s. And that is that oftentimes people now have better technology at home than they necessarily have at the office. And so people are learning critical thinking skills and discernment from their consumer lives versus what it is that's being taught necessarily within their professional lives. As a matter of fact, again, going back to Microsoft just published their annual workplace or their work index report. And they're showing that, there's a majority of employees that are using artificial intelligence on their personal devices in order to be able to do their work, but they're not telling anybody.
Right.
And so then how does that play into what it is that we want to see as far as critical thinking is concerned? So within an organizational context, where are we concerned about critical thinking? Well, we're concerned about critical thinking applied to using technology like AI because we want people to be attentive to and judicious, right? Selective about what information it is that they're exposing to artificial intelligence. Like before you put your sticky fingers on the keyboard, like what are you about to enter into that thing?
Before you tick without reading T's and C's.
Right, and that's the other thing too. Is and there's actually a funny exercise that I do in a workshop that I do where I have people actually use AI to read terms and conditions of websites, and the websites that we look at have zombie apocalypse clauses in them. So you are committing yourself to be on deck to help that organization if a zombie apocalypse were to break out, like you're signing by using that website. There's literally clauses, but that's what it's come to, in that we as consumers don't read terms and conditions anymore. So that's an issue. If you're a corporate organization and you've got your workforce is desperate for being able to the tools that they know is going to help them navigate these massive workloads, right? Everybody's looking for some kind of relief. And so are they being judicious? Are they being selective? Are they being mindful? Are they using critical thinking skills in what it is that they're entering into the machines? And then the same thing with the output of the machines, right? So how are we validating any of the information or any of the outputs that's coming out of any kind of artificial intelligence? How are we checking the references? How are we checking that the material is valid? What is even a definition? What evaluation criteria are people necessarily using? And again, just going back to external forces that are happening outside of organizations that are putting pressure internally, like in the UK is a perfect example. Since 2012, we've actually recognized stress in the workplace as an epidemic since 2012. And so and I would say, with Dr. Carrie Cooper, Professor Carrie Cooper out of the UK, like this whole idea of resilience and well-being and being able to manage not only high pressure challenge, but being able to deal with stress. Well, if you think about, 2012 was now 12 years ago, and the pressure has just mounted and the workloads have continued to mount. And we see this over and over again. So are people in positions of trying to deal with their professional lives where they're using these technologies to try and help them to actually deliver value at work, but they're almost in I won't say desperation for a lack of a better word, but I mean, they're feeling the pressure. And when you're under that kind of pressure, when we talk about stress, your neocortex isn't necessarily the part of the brain that you're thinking with. And so then that becomes an issue. There's one last thing on this particular point that I don't hear enough people talking about, and that is a concept of automation bias. Okay, so question for you, Hannah. So automation bias, when I say the words automation bias to you, what does that make you think about?
My interpretation of automation bias would be maybe people just assuming that if a computer has come out with the right answer, then it is correct, because that's what the computer says. And also internally, that the automation process is only correct as what has been fed in, it's the output is only as valid as the input. When you give a group of classroom children to do long division, there is about 4 different ways of getting to that answer. But if AI or if a computer's only been trained in one way, it might not be able to think around the other ways of getting to the same answer.
That's a really good example. And again, like if we go back to 2012, another part of the year 2012 that was an inflection point was really when mobile took off. And so here's the next question to that is, and think about what it is that you just shared. What devices do you talk to today?
Yeah, I became aware of this in a college class that I did. It was called Crime and Punishment, and it kind of went into surveillance. And we had to assess exactly every device that was around us that was surveilling us. And one thing, I don't have them on me, but my professor took out her car keys and was like, your car keys are assessing where you're parked, where you're going, all of this technology. Yeah, I'm talking to Siri. I've just put my watch on Do Not Disturb. I've got a few screens around here. My AirPods are out. Yeah, several devices for me today.
Exactly, and it's everywhere. It's at the petrol pumps. I mean, it's not even just the devices that we think of that we know that we have some kind of a relationship with, like, the Alexas and the Siris and the Google Homes and the other whatnots. It's all these other common devices, like what you're just talking about with your car keys, or like, yeah, I mean, if people knew what
it starts to
swiping into buildings.
When should we push a coffee ad? If this is when they're getting up and this is when they're running past here. Yeah.
And so then why do they do that? They do those nudging, right? Like they know where so they're using all of this different data, right? So they know your consumer patterns because there are data brokers that are tracking information about us across all these different areas. And so then when they push those coffee ads, like number one, they know you're a coffee drinker. Number two, they know where you are in that space and time because you just came through and there was a beacon or a swipe or something that indicated or gave a signal that you were there, and coffee is in, that particular kind of proximity. So, okay, so then here's the next question to this with automation bias and when it comes to artificial intelligence. So when your devices like your watch are not on silent, they ding or you get a haptic response, right? And it tells you what, like when your watch dings or does something, makes a noise or, does the little shake on your wrist, what is that telling you?
It does make me reflect just how dependent or how kind of encased in these systems I am. I often make a Pavlov's dog example of
yes.
that I have like conditioned myself into standing up once an hour and doing a little walk around because my watch told me I told my farmer granddad this once and he was like, if you need your watch to tell you to get fresh air, I can't help you.
That's awesome. But that's exactly it. Like we have become conditioned now for more than a decade to respond to these devices. So when the device goes ding or the device has that haptic feeling where it gives us a little, literally like a little buzz or a little bit of a shake, like we automatically respond. And it's Pavlovian. It is like Pavlov's dogs. Okay, so now we're setting up these automations, right? Or these nudges within organizations now tie that back to automation bias and critical thinking. If we are now conditioned as human beings to respond to these machines like in a knee-jerk kind of way, and there's automation bias that's happening, that's automation bias. Like, okay. How is that circumventing people's critical thinking skills? Well, the machine told me to do it, therefore I didn't think I needed to validate the output. Therefore, I didn't validate the output, or therefore I wasn't thinking about what I was putting in. I'm just used to my personal data going into a machine like the watch on my wrist or the smartphone by my side. And I'm used to just reacting to whenever the machine goes ding and produces some kind of output, I go, oh, okay. And then I just go and take that as direction.
I'm wondering now if is my watch a stakeholder? Is this my board of directors that I'm reporting into? And I guess that's kind of, you can extrapolate that to the organization. while they know now that their employees have multiple, they're getting triggers, they're getting indications from multiple areas, all of what we just talked about, I can imagine, and we hear it a lot about the security concerns, and organizations being either reticent, cautious, and sometimes completely adverse to bringing in or integrating AI, which have their valid concerns. But I also think there needs to be a way of integrating it effectively. Is there anything that you could say or advise maybe when organizations that are to overcome these concerns around privacy, around data, around efficiency, access?
Good question. If we step back for kind of a second, kind of zoom out. So if we think about these things that are now sort of inundating people, right? Things that we've planned, right? Because in some cases we're designing learning experiences or performance support. We want to be able to nudge. We want to be able to make recommendations. Like we see that in our learning experience platforms, right? Like we have these kinds of capabilities that we're trying to actually even leverage ourselves. We know these human trigger points. But where is L&D as a function, making sure that this is part of the curriculum, right? Like making sure that this is part of what it is that we're training. How are we training our leaders about automation bias so that they can then train their associates or provide that as part of their guidance, right? And part of their oversight. And then that falls into all of these things. That falls into the data privacy that talks it, and that also falls into things like cybersecurity, right? So it's not only the privacy of data, but then it's also the security of data. So now if we think about the rise of deep fakes, and not just deep fakes with digital avatars, and we had kind of a good chuckle at the beginning of this, like we're starting to see, like in recruiting, where you've got candidates that are showing up that aren't human candidates. They're actually digital avatars that are interviewing on behalf of the human. But think about phishing schemes and social engineering schemes. And again, tying this back to automation bias and tying this back to critical thinking. Like there are very practical things and very practical scenarios that we can, as organizations, need to be attentive to in when it is that we're talking about AI fluency. So not just literacy, but AI fluency. And AI fluency would be developing a capability where you're able to navigate these different, you're able to apply multiple skills, right? And multiple qualities, I would say as well, in order to be able to navigate all of these different, in different contexts. So as an example, going back to the deepfakes for a second, it's also a very big political year around the world, not only with the US presidential elections that are coming up, but we've got major elections that are happening in Taiwan. We've got major elections that are happening in other countries and other parts of the world. So again, how are we being attentive to in organizations around things like going back to social engineering, and not only deep fakes in the likeness of digital avatars, but in cloned voices, in deep fake text, written word, like, and how is L&D getting ahead of this? And how are we using this both as, it's like anything else. This technology is a double-edged sword. There's a lot of benefit to it. There's a lot of risk to it. And then how are we making sure that we're navigating in between, that we're helping people to be able to use artificial intelligence responsibly, ethically, and then also inclusively. So it's really making sure across those three parameters, in addition to being successful using the tools. And yes, I would say one of the biggest cornerstones in AI fluency is that critical thinking piece, but we really need to unpack it into all of the different variations, including automation bias. And if we're attentive to that, then we can get the governance pieces done right. So going back to your question, so making sure that we're being attentive to what data, what are the biases in that data, what AI models are we using, what is the intention of the solutions that we're building, how are we testing those solutions, how are we monitoring and managing? And just kind of a last point on this. So, artificial intelligence isn't new. We've had artificial intelligence for 70 years. What's new with generative AI is that these models are dynamic rather than static. What has come before with machine learning has been human instructed deterministic models that, got to a point where you would test them, optimize them, and then release them into production. And unless something happened in the environment of the model could actually, keep sending out predictable outputs and predictable results. That's like the polar opposite of the generative AI models. There's a lot of engineering and design that goes into what is surrounded, how we're surrounding these models or engaging these generative AI models in order to be able to provide generative AI powered solutions. But once it goes into production, this isn't like, hey, we'll check on it every quarter or we'll check on it every 6 months. The measurements, the monitoring, and the management of any solution that has these models in it, because they are so dynamic, needs to be on an ongoing basis. And that's an entirely different cadence than organizations and certainly L&D are used to.
Mhm.
And we need to be able to, be attentive to that. And that again goes back into what are we looking at, including how are we monitoring what it is that people are putting into the models, how it is that they are engaging with the models, and how it is that they are validating or not those outputs from what's being delivered from these solutions. Helpful?
Very, and I was just a few weeks ago at Iventive's Learning Futures Texas session, hosted by Vidya Krishnan, the Chief Learning Officer for Ericsson at their North American headquarters. And we were joined by Peter Linder, who is the Head of Thought Leadership for Ericsson North America, previously Head of 5G Technology. Very interesting insights, very interesting, a great storyteller. And one thing that he reflected from, he's originally from Sweden, and talking around technology, particularly 5G and how Ericsson is advanced in that space. But he reflected, there's more people like my mum than like me. And that's who you're building technology for. And that's who the mass consumption is. And that's what you need to be mindful of in your communication, in your marketing, in the governance. So I thought that really resonated with me in particular. And another phrase that I've heard before at Iventive sessions, it's a proverb, but it says that when the winds of change blow, some people build walls and some people build windmills. Do you think learning is building windmills with the winds of change that AI is, or do you think we're still maybe building walls?
So I've been in workplace learning and performance for a very long time, since really since the early 1990s. And I have, for probably the better part of the past 10 years, been ringing the bell on artificial intelligence and other exponential technologies for quite some time. And I think L&D is late to the game. And the reason why I say that is many reasons, but one that I would want to point out is that L&D, and this is not unique to L&D, but this is certainly one of the hallmarks of an industry ripe for not just disruption but deconstruction, is an echo chamber. And what that means is L&D often is benchmarking against others in L&D. And so we almost soothe ourselves walking through an expo hall or going to a conference or talking to peers and finding out that others are no farther ahead than us, or if anybody's ahead, it's only like a handful of people, but we're only looking within the industry rather than looking at what's happening outside of the industry. And that is an existential threat at this particular point in time, because again, the thing that we really need to be paying attention to is how our consumer lives are changing all around the world, and what access do people have to other types of experiences, like online shopping experiences, educational experiences. I'll give you two specific examples that came out of Microsoft Build this week. One is, I'll give you three actually. One is that they made an announcement that Microsoft has a partnership now with Khan Academy, where the Khan Academy AI chatbot called Khanmigo is now going to be available to all teachers for kindergarten through 12th grade here in the United States for free, 100% for free. That's going to help teachers with instructional design. That's going to help them with assessment. Like, this is what this AI is designed to do. And oh, by the way, Khanmigo is actually also trained on math. And so what that means is Microsoft has now just released an open source model, AI model called PHI-3. And Phi-3 is trained on math. So we've seen, like, a lot of these other models have been trained on English, which is why they're really good at language, or at least the English language, and not so great at math. Well, now that's changing, because now we have these new models and you can kind of use them in combination. But the point is, like, if we think about that, this is now coming into teachers in academia, then what does that mean to instructional design in the workplace? What does that mean to learning experience design in the workplace? And who might make available to our business leaders, to the populations that we serve? Like, we're about to have tools that are free where people can generate their own courses, they can generate their own training materials, they can generate their own performance support, job aids and checklists and all the rest of it with efficacy. Like, the expertise, and this circles this all the way back around again, the expertise is actually baked into the machine, where the AI actually has access to not only the knowledge, but these things are performant. This is what's different about this new round of AI and being a round of expert systems. We tried to do expert systems in the 1980s. We couldn't feed them data fast enough in order to have them keep up. And we were also reliant on them being, those AI at the time, being human instructed. These AI, they have the capability, like, we keep learning what capabilities these models have inherent just in their development. We did not instruct them to do things. We can augment them with other expertise to make them really good at a particular kind of task. So look at what's happening with, like, Conmigo, the same kind of thing. Like, in the United Arab Emirates, they've actually had a partnership with Microsoft Now, the Ministry of Education. They actually started offering an AI tutor to all students across the UAE back in November of last year, right? So how is this, like, going to come into the workplace? And again, if people have access to it without necessarily having to go through another team, like having to go through a function or having to go through, L&D, like, are people going to take advantage of it because they're trying to get stuff done? And then the last bit on that is, I would take a look at, well, two other things real quick. So one is online shopping. So in Microsoft Build, they did a great job with, they did a setup where the new model that OpenAI just released again last week with GPT-4o, O is in the letter O, Omni, now gives vision and voice to any website and any app. So think about a shopping experience where you can just have a conversation literally with the website and be able to engage with it in conversation, and then also be able to use the computer camera in order to be able to show it, like, the kind of thing that are, objects. Yeah, hiking shoes, exactly. So he was like, and in that example, he was like, is this hiking shoe good for this particular scenario? And the website's like, no, you're going to be better served with whatever. And then the last example was, and I thought this was pretty funny, because it was a dad trying to keep up with their son in Minecraft and then got chased by Minecraft zombies. So that also takes us back to zombie apocalypse again. But basically, you can take a device like your phone or a tablet and be able to, we've talked about, or people I think are fairly well aware now of using text as a prompt, as an input into these types of models now, but we can now actually use what's happening on our computer screens as a prompt, and the AI can follow along. And so in this particular case, the AI was giving real-time guidance and coaching to the dad who was trying to learn how to navigate Minecraft. And it was the AI who first alerted to him that the zombies were coming, and he had his little avatar had to go run and hide. So, okay, so think about that with, if that's performance support, right? If that's what performance support looks like in 2024 and from here on out, then again, macro trend, we've been talking about this for 40, probably 50 years. It's not about learning, it's about performance. And so how do we make sure that people have what it is that they need in that moment of need in order to be able to perform better, in order to be able to develop skill and capability? And how does L&D shift its thinking away from that everything's got to be learning and people have to take on the cognitive demands and the cognitive load. And how do we reframe to be like, okay, this human in this moment of need, or these people in this moment of need are going to need these things. What is the guidance that we might be able to provide them in real time versus, what is the course or the learning experience that they need to attend in order to be able to then come back into that flow of work?
I think it's so fascinating. I enjoyed those examples as well, especially the Minecraft coaching one. I was like, I would need a full-time staff. They'd be on shift rotation, the AI for me, if I was to try and play that. Which also, if I've signed up to it being any zombie apocalypse teams, they don't want me. They don't want me. They just leave me out. But I think
That's right.
I noticed that about the card amigo as well. And I reflected that if you give access to one school teacher, by extension, you're giving it to 30 schools children who will become familiar with the language. And again, seeing it used in real time. So seeing it as ubiquitous, as part of their daily life. And to your point, it's all about making it real and making it, how can this help me complete this task right now? Live feedback, particularly, we've seen it with simulations, we've seen it with AR, VR, is how people making that intervention at critical points. Not once the operation is completed, but when you're about to make that bad stitch or that bad cut,
right.
To intervene at that point of need, I think is revolutionary.
Yes, and we've had it. It's not new. So, and it's not new. It's just better. Like, it's evolving and it's becoming more accessible, both in terms of people being able to have physical access to the technology, and then also at a price point, right? Like, free is affordable. Like, free is affordable, right? So GPT, and that's another point, is that OpenAI made these models free last week, right? So people can build. And that's another, you can now for free and freely available with OpenAI, with these newer models, be able to build your own custom GPTs, right? So then what does that mean? And we've been here before in that, like Formula One racing, they've actually had AI coaching and AI monitoring with the drivers in the cars for a number of years. We've seen it in sports for a long period of time. As a matter of fact, when I'm in London and doing keynotes in London, like, that's often what I talk about, is like the Premier League, right? Like, they've instrumented, the game and can actually impact in real time the outcomes of the game, right? Because they can guide the coaches, they can guide the players. But even if we go all the way back again, and again, back to, even further back than 2012, like back to 2004, 2004 is when we got another device called Palm Pilots. Now, Palm Pilots were the first time that we sort of had this organizer where we outsource parts of our brains. And for people my age, the big thing about that was we suddenly didn't have to remember phone numbers anymore. And that was really weird. Like, as a little kid, you remembered all these different phone numbers in case you got lost or had to call somebody, whatever. Like, you had to store all that in your head, or we had it in a thing called a Rolodex, or we had it written down on paper. But you suddenly had this Palm Pilot, and this device that you could have on your person would have, the first thing would be contact information, and then it became other applications over time. I will never forget, in 2004, it was October of 2004 here in Chicago at Loyola University, and Allison Rossett, who's an amazing L&D leader who's retired now, has a whole focus on performance support, did an amazing keynote at that event in October of 2004 and talked about the separation of instruction from information. That we suddenly had a device where we could make a distinction between what do people absolutely positively have to learn, like a process, versus what is information that they could reference in real time when they needed it, because we suddenly had this device. And so the Palm Pilot became, again, sort of this like second brain that could then inform a process that people had to learn. And the example that she gave at the time was the United States Coast Guard, and talking about that the Coast Guard had to be able to do an inspection of like 200 and some odd different types of watercraft, anything from like a little dinghy to like a massive barge. And so when you separated the instruction from the information, you suddenly had an opportunity where people had to learn the inspection process. That was meaningful to learn, but they didn't have to learn anymore the details about each of the 200 plus watercraft. And they didn't need a 5-ring binder with that information. It was suddenly in this device next to them. we're at that same advent in time, but the device next to us, again, is performant. It can actually perform skills and aid us in that guidance in real time. It's not just providing knowledge, it's providing expertise. And that's the big difference about what's happening 20 years later in 2024 than what happened at that flashpoint in 2004 with the Palm Pilots.
I think it's almost existential for L&D, and that it's what many people have wanted for many years, which is not just offering courses and compliance training, and saying, okay, we're order takers. It's being able to really effectively partner the business, partner the strategy. Is this the gap? Is this where you need? Well, we can get you there, and we can get you there quickly, and we can just bring us along. We can intervene at that point.
Yes, and Hannah, what happens when the orders stop? Right? Like, what happens if you're an L&D function and most of the work that you're working on is an order that came from somewhere, and now they don't just assume that, training is the appropriate intervention, that they have these other types of solutions that can fill their orders. What happens when the orders stop?
I do think it's a big opportunity for learning. I think it's a really exciting one. I do think it's it's existential, but with that, it means that you can there's a way to think positively about it and really thinking about the potential of what's to come. Is there anything that you are particularly excited about, or for the next, maybe it's really hard to give timeframes with AI. We could have this same conversation next week, and we'll be talking about 4 different platforms and 3 different keynotes and a completely new tech. But just kind of looking ahead, particularly with your expertise of seeing it applied in learning role, but also more broadly, what are you excited about? What would you recommend L&D professionals, click off this video and look up straight away?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm happy to share this. So one of the things that I believe that I've shared I've entered before with the community, and I'm happy to share this too, is I have a framework that's set up in the standard kind of crawl, walk, run, fly, and it's a trajectory on where it is that you can get to with artificial intelligence. And so a crawl phase is experimentation, and it's where oftentimes we kind of think of these tools as a toy. So crawl and toy is kind of the first phase, and that's the experimentation. Going from experimentation to walk is a big deal. That's when you really need to do something meaningful, right? Like, you're applying now artificial intelligence against workflow. You're delivering meaningful value. That's what walking is all about. And that's when we start to see artificial intelligence as a tool. The next rung up is run, right? So how do we go from walk to run? Run is now assistance, right? This is a guide by the side. This is like the examples that we gave, where you've got something that's performant, that's kind of guiding a human. It's augmenting the human's performance through the machine's performance, right? So that would be running. And we don't have to, it's not like you start here and then you just advance here in an orderly fashion with everything. You're going to have a bunch of different things in the organization that are going to be at different stages. But I find the framework helpful, and in the organizations that I work with, to be able to map to this, to say, okay, this particular thing is a crawl phase, it's experimentation, we're looking at it as a toy, there's not an expectation that it's delivering meaningful value, that's cool, but what is the, kind of the phase gate to get from that crawl phase to walk? But the last one, and this is the one that L&D really needs to be attentive to, and we'll see this take off even more so. It's here today, but it's going to take off even more so in 2024, and that is agents, AI agents. And the difference between AI agent and an AI assistant or an AI co-pilot is an agent is you give it a goal. You don't give it a task, you give it a goal. Or a team of agents, you give it a goal, and the agent or agents plural together plan and reason and then decide what tasks, and then can execute against the goal. And so one of the things that I'm actually going to be demonstrating soon is how it is that you can have a team of agents that actually reflect an entire L&D department, like a performance consultant and a learning experience designer and an analyst. And how can you have AI agents that form a team that can then execute against everything from the original strategy all the way through to actually doing learning experience design or instructional design, and then all the way through to actually doing the measurement and evaluation piece and building out those assets. And so if we have agents, and we do, how do we learn as humans to work with our algorithmic teammates?
Yeah.
And that's where we're heading, is that these agents become algorithmic teammates and even become algorithmic transformers that transform all of the workflows and the business processes that we have, not only within L&D, but then of course throughout the organization. And then what is L&D's role in helping to make that happen, this AI fluency and this AI transformation happen?
And it will come down to that communication piece. How are you effectively communicating? I think,
and critical thinking.
and
Yep.
critical
And
thinking.
where do we fit in the value chain? Mm-hmm.
Which, and it harkens back to something I've heard before in all these conversations about AI, there always seems to be the conclusion that, well, how are we now thinking about human intelligence? That's the most precious kind of intelligence. With all of these advents with AI, how are we then thinking how human can partner with it? Oh, you disagree?
No disrespect, but I think we're a little too hung up on human intelligence and not considerate of other intelligences that have been around us all of this time. I think it comes down to human ingenuity. It comes down to imagination. The things that the machines can't do is imagine. Now, perhaps there's some human intelligence that goes into imagination, but I would say that it's the combination of those two, the human intelligence along with human imagination into human ingenuity. It's human ingenuity along with the artificial intelligence that I think is really going to make the day. And my concern is that if we focus too much on human intelligence, the machines are going to beat us. Like they're already there. They're already there from benchmarks and standards and so on and so forth. Like when you measure against, all sorts of different ways that we measure human intelligence, the machines are already ahead, at least in English and at least in the Western world. So that's also something to be attentive to.
So for me, perhaps to clarify, I do agree in the sense that I think it's all about identifying how can I interact effectively? So, and knowing what it will always outpace me on, or, outspeed to competency, but
Right.
what about staying curious and staying engaged, staying critically thinking about it? What can you designate, and what can only I, with my personal sum of experiences, bring to this project? And I think it's that whole work smarter, not harder, and kind of applying
Yes.
to the technology. And I'm very conscious of the time,
Yeah.
but I did want to just ask one personal question, which I thought would be interesting. So I know you've been an AI adopter and a technology adopter for a long time. What is the earliest technology that you remember adopting or integrating into your life?
Oh, that's a really cool question. I'm gonna say as a child, spirographs. Do you know what spirographs are?
I don't think, is it with the pen with the
Yeah.
it goes round and
Yeah.
round? Yeah.
Yeah. So they're the little plastic like stencils.
Yeah.
Yep. So spirographs. So you would take them on a piece of paper and so it would allow you to draw like really cool shapes. But it would be different plastic stencils in different sizes and different shapes, and you would just put the stencil on the paper and then put your pen in and your marker. If how it, I think we all can relate, or most of us can relate to like what it was like as a child when an adult allowed you to use a marker or a colorful pen. Like, so spirographs, because it augmented, right? It made me better at being able to draw in a creative way. So I would say that would be the earliest age.
Oh, thank you. That's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Trish. I could stay here for another few hours. I've got a few more pages of questions.
Awesome.
And it would be, I would be really curious to pick up on this conversation 6 months, 1 year down. What were we right about? What did we not even predict could be here? But I really appreciate your time, and again, your passion and staying curious and looking at what's out there. What are the new releases? Again, I think it's all about just knowing what's coming, or not knowing what's coming, but anticipating that you're going to need to know about it. It's always great to have you with us, a great presence at any event, which is where we talk about all of these things in a safe space, where you can say,
Yep.
you know, is this going to end L&D, or am I using it in the right way? Small group conversations with peers such as yourself, connecting, collaborating, will help ease those concerns and really drive change. So thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Yay, Kate. Call me anytime.